Hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Talk Landscape. My name is Andrea Chavarri, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the 8th episode of Talk Landscape, our live monthly podcast. We have a very, very special episode today. I know I always say this in every Talk Landscape episode, but it's very true today. But yeah, first of all, say hi, tell us where you're joining from. We're going live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Tell us where you're watching from. I'm joining you live from Bonn, Germany. I have a very special announcement. We're full of special announcements today. We have 3 incredible newsletters for you to subscribe to if you want to stay up to date on the latest climate and environmental stories in your email inbox. We will not spam you. You can select to subscribe to the 3 of these newsletters. We have the weekly feature, we have the Talk Landscape newsletter, and the monthly news digest. Simply scan this QR code that you see on screen right now, or find the link that's being shared in any of the chats to choose the newsletter that you want to subscribe to. So that being said, welcome again. Let's start this episode. First of all, I would like to introduce my co-host for today. That's the first surprise of this very special Talk Landscape episode. Welcome, Eden Flaherty. He's our multimedia editor at Think Landscape.
Hey, thank you. I'm really excited to be here today and to be able to talk about the narratives.
Exactly. So we are discussing who gets to talk about the climate crisis today. Who gets to decide, or what gets to decide, what ultimately lands in our social media feeds, what we see on TV, if you still watch TV, what we read in the newspapers and other digital media. Who really gets a voice? Who gets to say in the climate crisis? We have 3 guests joining us today to help us unpack this very complicated issue. So allow me to introduce, first of all, Natalia Figueiredo, who is a journalist and marketing specialist and a GLF social media ambassador, joining us from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Welcome, Natalia.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I would like to welcome Estêvão Ciavatta Pantoja, who is the CEO and co-founder of Pindorama Filmes, a storyteller also based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Welcome, Estêvão.
Hi. Nice to be here.
I'm also happy to introduce Chris Wells, professor of emerging media studies at the Boston University's College of Communication.
Hello from Boston.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are full house today. First time we have 5 speakers, so let's get this started. So we're discussing climate narratives, who gets to say when we talk about the climate crisis. But first of all, Chris, why are we talking about climate narratives? It seems like a very, I don't know, abstract or complex concept. Why are climate narratives important for everyone?
Yeah, well, I love that you're talking about who gets to talk in about this issue, because in communication, we're often asking this question about who gets to define kind of the parameters of debate or what the relevant categories are in an issue. And I mean, that's definitely true in climate as well. So in the United States, more so than in other parts of the world, climate is a super divided issue politically. People's beliefs about the facts of climate vary widely. So the narratives in the United States go all the way down to, like, is climate happening and what's causing it? And then once you kind of get into that stuff, there's a lot of debates about different aspects of climate, who's going to be affected by climate if you believe in it. There's a whole variety of different forms of what are referred to as climate denialism, ways in which people claim that climate isn't happening or isn't happening in the way that the scientific consensus argues that it is. So given all that, it's really significant which of these narratives make it into different forms of media and then make it into people's news feeds or newspapers for the small number of people who read newspapers directly. So yeah, it's a super important question.
Absolutely. And the topic of climate is very divisive. Like you said, people are completely denying it or trying to actually fight the climate crisis. So thank you for reassuring how important this is, especially in today's context. Now, I want to ask Estêvão, how, like in your experience as a filmmaker, as a storyteller with such a long trajectory, how are climate narratives shaped? How are the conversations, the ways that we talked about climate, shaped and created or built?
Hi, Andrea. Hi, Eden, Natalia, Chris, and everybody who's watching us. Look, now I've been working on this issue. I mean, since the early of the century, the first decade. And in Brazil, I did the first series about climate change in Brazil, specifically in 2009. So a long time ago. And and today, after all that we know about science, and I mean it's very clear about what's going on. And even if we are not divided in I mean, many people in Brazil know that it's happening because we are feeling this each time. It becomes more clear that we are suffering from this. But the thing is that it's hard for people and politicians and everybody to take action in this issue. So I think that we have to use art, we have to use emotions, and nowadays I'm developing other strategies other than YouTube and television and cinema. And I'm working on virtual reality, on immersive exhibitions, uh, because I think that we have to touch people's heart about it. When they feel it, they will take some action on that. And in Brazil specifically, we have a big issue in the south with the floods in the south, the drought in Amazon, the drought in the northeast. So kind of people is aware of what's going on, but now we have to take action on this issue. So I think that we should use the emotions to transmit what exactly is going on. And we have very strong stories here in Brazil.
And how has your work been with? Have you worked with scientists? Have you worked or collaborated with journalists? Or do you consider yourself a journalist, a storyteller, an artist?
I consider myself more as an artist, and I work close to scientists and also with NGOs, some NGOs in Brazil. And it's interesting because my work with the NGOs, I did a documentary in 2000, we released in 2019, but we started it in 2014. And it was a great experience because at that time in 2014, we foreseen what would be the main issue of the Amazon region in the future, because we knew that that was, I mean, the land grab in Amazon. And maybe this documentary that I did, this Amazon Sociedade Anônima, in English would be translated to Amazonia Undercover. The main issue for us at that time was to put on the front page the land grabbing in the Amazon. But it was hard to explain how it was happening. And at that time, people didn't treat it as it is. So my work with them was, okay, this is a real problem. We have to work on it. And they were really important for me at the first time to foresee the problem, and then to during the shootings to give me some inputs and datas. And when we released the film, also to present, we presented to the Supreme Court in Brazil, we presented to many politicians, we did a series to bankers, so we did a series of connections to explain people, look, we have to deal with it. So I love to work with people, I mean, to have more inputs in my work.
I really like how you combine both art and actual facts and input from the realities that you're visiting when you create your films. And I wanted to maybe ask this to Chris. When we put into balance emotions or art versus facts, what do you think weighs more when ultimately creating this climate narratives or narratives in general? But since we are discussing the climate crisis, what do you think moves people more? How this balance affects the way that climate narratives are shaped?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that what we have seen with climate, especially with the polarization that I mentioned earlier, is that some of the beliefs and facts can trail behind people's other kinds of feelings and commitments. So we tend to think in kind of this rational model where people observe the world and they come to conclusions about the facts about it, and then that leads them to sort of policy positions or beliefs about issues. But that's probably too simple. And I think to a significant extent with these very polarized issues, people may not have a real strong grounding in something like climate on a factual basis. They may not have experienced it directly, which is one reason that I think that art and other forms of expression that can demonstrate the impacts and the potential impacts of something like this are so important. But if someone doesn't have personal experience with it, they're more likely to have their view shaped by other parts of their experience, which might include their partisanship. It might include the kind of political and social battles they see going on in society, and in which they tend to align themselves with kind of other aspects of the identity that they find resonant. That's like background to say. That facts aren't as much the sort of prime state as we might sometimes think of them. And once again, I think that really highlights why it's important that people have exposure to a variety of narratives, especially of an issue like climate. And one other thing that I would add would be there's a lot of climate anxiety. So there is polarization, and especially with the United States, there's strong polarization on this issue, but there is very strong climate anxiety. The Yale program on climate, which looks at public opinion across the US, shows that almost half of Americans are very anxious about climate issues. But we also have the problem in the US that even among those who are anxious and concerned about the issue, there's not a lot of clear opportunities to take action on it. Our political system isn't very well set up, especially right now, for dealing with the climate crisis. And that's another reason why I think that narratives that go beyond expressing the problem, but also offer hope, offer people pathways to do something that display communities and activists and artists who are taking even small actions to show that you can be a person who is concerned about the climate in a positive way, in a hopeful way, so that the only messages people are receiving about climate, even if they are reasonably understanding of the science, so that the only messages they're seeing aren't dooms ones, really unfortunate ones.
Thank you so much for that overview. So you mentioned that if you're not touched by experience, or if you don't witness the damaging effects of climate change, you're just not going to care about it. However, not everyone has the resources to produce films, to write articles, and to share their climate-related experiences. But social media does offer a way for practically anyone with a cell phone, with internet connection, to share either photos or videos or live blogs, etc. So in theory, social media would be a democratic, open way for us to have grounded conversations on around the climate crisis. And now I want to ask Natalia, in your experience as journalist, as a marketing specialist, as a content creator, as a podcaster as well, how do you think this translates, or how do you think climate narratives are shaped in social media?
Yes, thank you for the question. As you said, it should be nice for us to express ourselves and talk with friends and having a great connection, but it's not like that. I research internet a lot through my work for my clients, and even though this space started as a place of global connection, things changed a lot, and the segmentation of digital bubbles starting change our relationships. So it's hard to fight against this. And disinformation gain unprecedented speed and scale. Instead of creating bridges, we built walls that pushed many people towards extremists and many other simple steps away and don't want to stay over there to read something. I don't know if you know that, but today more than 50% of global online traffic is generated by bots. So organizing information has become a huge challenge for us. There is actually a technique on Google that you can use, like before 2023, to find content from before the flood of artificial intelligence material that confused the algorithm. And some projections says that 99% of online content will be produced by robots and only 1% by human, according to the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies. AI is still a great assistant, but they serve two corporations which have their own biases. So it's hard for us, but we have to be there, like doing our content, expressing our stories, and telling people what is going on. Because if not us, who? And the opposite is some real famous TV host in Brazil saying that the Amazon represents only 1% of the world, so it doesn't matter for climate change. And we can see right now when fake news, usually something, they will say something that people expect. So it's easier to go faster than the truth. And usually it's like something that maybe it's not a total lie, but for out of context, out of context or out of time, and it's easy to people to spread that. It's also easy because in Brazil we have like one kind of cell phone plans that offer people only use social media. They can go straight to the website, so they read the titles and spread with friends. So it's much more easier to have a live operation, a live supply chain, to then produce real stories. It's hard for us, but we are still here doing our jobs.
Fantastic. I'm gonna jump in now, and I have another question for Chris, but it actually just builds on what Natalia was saying there, because not all climate narratives are positive. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of disinformation and there's a lot of challenging narratives around climate change and the climate crisis. So, Chris, I was wondering, could you perhaps explain the difference, first of all, between misinformation and disinformation, if you could? And then also maybe tell us about what are some of the problematic or challenging narratives that are being presented at the moment and what they're doing to the wider climate narrative.
Sure. Yeah. So mis and disinformation are distinguished mostly through the question of intent. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to do with their wrongedness, if you will, but more the intent. So the idea of misinformation is that it's information that's being spread around that somebody may not spread maliciously. It may be untrue, but they might think it's true, or they might sort of not care if it's true. Whereas disinformation is misinformation that is spread purposefully for some kind of political or other economic, it could be, goal. And that turns out in research to be maybe not that useful, because it's often really difficult to know what an actor's incentives are in sharing mis or disinformation. But okay, so some of the narratives. So I might distinguish between sort of the most flagrant forms of climate denialism that we see out there, things like claims that it isn't happening, that the charts are rigged, that the famous hockey stick chart with temperatures going up really fast in the second half of the 20th century, and CO2 levels as well is false, that kind of stuff. There's a whole ream of that kind of material that's out there, and you can detect it in social media. There are different actors that are spreading it. Many of them may be bots, to Natalia's point. Skeptical Science is a great website that has cataloged and gone through what the actual science is on things like solar flares and which parts of the Antarctic ice cap are melting and those kinds of things. But let me add to that kind of more mundane forms of information that aren't necessarily false, but are more misleading. This is what we saw in our study, not of social media, but of native advertising in American news media. So this is advertising that is made to look like news articles, but it is placed and paid for and usually has a small disclosure from a company. And we looked at fossil fuel companies' native ads in American media. And the kind of information we see there is not those flagrant kinds of disinformation. They are not claiming that climate change isn't happening, which ExxonMobil was, 15 and more years ago, but not in recent native advertising. Instead, it's, you could argue more insidious. It's this argument that natural gas is going to solve all of our problems because it is less CO2 intensive than coal, but it's still a carbon fuel that's still pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That sits alongside other messages that all support the premise that fossil fuel companies are in the process of solving the climate problem, and that the message is kind of, if we just sit tight and let them do their work, they're going to solve the problem. There's a few more sub-narratives underneath that. There's a lot of promotion of technologies that are quite questionable. Maybe the most infamous one was ExxonMobil advertising that with something they called green algae, they were going to get off of fossil fuels, essentially. That never panned out, and a couple of years ago, they even pulled the plug on the small algae program that they had. So we were highlighting with that study some of the problems with those even more mundane forms of climate, maybe not misinformation, but misleadingness that could lead citizens to conclude that we don't need larger action on the issue.
That's really interesting. It's interesting to hear an example of like that purposeful, pushing of the narratives through the use of advertisements and stuff. Before I move on to the next question for one of our guests, I'm just going to ask the audience, because I know we have people joining us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. If you've seen any examples of climate misinformation, disinformation, or just misleading information around the climate crisis, it would be great if you could share it with us in the chat, because it'd be interesting to see how that differs around the world, because it looks like we have people joining us from all over. So while you do that, Estêvão, you've had a long career as a filmmaker. Have you seen the narratives around climate or the attitudes to climate change over your career as a filmmaker? Specifically, have you seen any increase or decrease of the pushback against the narratives on climate change or the watering down of topics?
Well, I think that we are facing each time more challenging time, because also in Brazil we have a huge polarization, and in here we have religion close to this issue also. So the deniers are, or from the right wing, they are close to the evangelic church in Brazil that are spreading over the Amazon. And it's weird because in the Amazon specifically, we have most people, they are not touched by climate change. This is a huge challenge. We are working in this issue using religion, and what I mean by that, we developed a virtual reality film to present in churches, in evangelic church in the Amazon, presenting the wonder of the forest, how it is, the importance of it to the people, to everybody, and it is presented by a chief, an indigenous chief. So they have I don't know how to say in English, a lugar de fala, she can write to speak about the forest and from the forest. But the central idea is that in the end of the film, where you experience this wilderness, where you see animals, you go to the rivers, and you go up high to 40 meters tree, Sumauma tree. The end, the question that raises is, what are what are you and your church doing about the creation of God? So this changes completely the way people are thinking, because and this leads to, who are you supporting politically? People that are destroying, or people that are preserving the creation? So I think that we should now use other tools to touch people. You know, we should use religion, we should use humor, we should use emotions, we should use whatever we have to, because I think that, as I said in the beginning, the films and the facts, they have already been presented. Science has already been shown for everybody. It's clear. Who doesn't see is because, or you don't want to assume this, or you have someone that is telling you not to hear things like that. And I think that's something very important that Chris said. It's about the positive narrative that we need nowadays, because other thing is that when you say, look, the crazy, everything is going wrong, we are close to the end of the world, we are already uh, under a lot of problems, political problems, financial problems, problems with our family, psychological problems. We don't want more problems. So this also pushes people back from from getting into action on the crisis, climate crisis. We have to give a way of living, of thinking about this. And I think that the main thing about that we should also put on the table is that it's about life. Life in the universe is something special. What we have here, we don't have, or at least we don't know where we have something similar to it in the whole universe. So that's what can defeat the end of the world. Life, and life in every forms of life. So also this empathy with other, with plants, and presenting. Now I'm writing a play to be presented in theaters all over Brazil, and the idea all is all the to fight against this idea of the end of the world. That also the people that commands our social media and the technologies are building bunkers, or are planning to take people to Mars and things crazy, things like that. And I have to say, come on, this is absurd. This can't go like this. You have to think in another way. You have to understand that, for instance, in your and we should connect science and traditional knowledge, science and religion. I mean, okay, the Bible says that it was in 3 days, 6 days, that the world was built. Okay, this is a beautiful image, but we know from science that it's 4.5 billion years. But it doesn't it's not against the idea of 6 days. It just said, wow, it was not 6 days, it was 4 billion. This gives me more a feeling, a deep inside of emotion, to think about, wow, what a wonderful world we live in it. We took 4.5 billion years to make the paradise. So I think that we have to bring some new inputs and think ways of getting out of this idea of the end of the world.
Nice, thank you. Do you think as the narratives become more divisive, and maybe all of the conversations become split along harder lines, do you think a way to respond to that is by being more positive in all of the narratives that we do use around climate?
In a way, more positive, but people that suffers in their everyday life, what's
Mhm.
going on, because I think also that we that live in some places in the world, we don't we don't feel until now very much what's going on. We kind of have a air conditioner, or we have some facilities. Oh no, it's not like that. But many people, and I read here on the people that are watching us, one person from Nepal said, "Look, huh, I'm being affected by this. Has to be presented, because
Mhm.
dramas and deep feelings also move people. We have to present stories that move people through drama, or through humor, or through religion, or through anything, but have to move people to understand what's going on in our world."
Thank you. Cheers. Natalia, you mentioned that you do a lot of work online, you research a lot online. Unfortunately, that is where a lot of negative climate narratives propagate. This, a lot of disinformation and misinformation. I'll ask you the same question that I asked the audience. Have you got any examples that jump out to you? But also, what's your reaction to them? What do you do when you come across something that seems to be misleading, whether on purpose or just accidentally?
Mm-hmm. It's hard to fight one by one time. So I count on my community, on my network to help with them. When it's someone with someone near to me, like my family or my friends, I try to make a conversation, send some articles, be more didactic that I can be. But speaking also from my newsroom experience, when we talk about like the traditional media, we have to remember how important journalism is for our democracy. So we know they are business, they look for capital, but I count on us to help me with this mission to be like every newsroom should be a fact-checking agents right now. We need everyone to help on this mission. Yesterday the Intercept Brazil released a list of the main media sponsors during the COP. That many of them were also responsible for environment disasters right here in Brazil. And this kind of information makes us analyze the coverage critically, but not erase them. You know, our very first lesson in J school is that there is no impartiality. We have to read, watch, and listen, and everything, but always with a critical eye. So this is a lesson I think for everybody. That include creators too. When we follow someone, it's important to know which brands support them. It's not the good side and the bad side, you know. So I try to not take this easy path of saying that everything is the media's fault, especially because we already live in this deep misinformation time. So yeah, I count on Jen to help me with that.
Now, Natalia, you have highlighted the very, very important role of journalists and newsrooms in checking the facts, in checking the kind of news that they spread online and on newspapers and all kind of journalistic media. So, Chris, I want to ask you, as part of your research project in combating climate misinformation, what are other possible ways that not only journalists, but other stakeholders like policymakers, civil society can and should be doing to tackle misinformation?
So misinformation is a really thorny problem in the United States, where we have political polarization, and as we do in other parts of the world, but in the United States, it's especially stark, partly because of our two-party system. This is important to the misinformation problem because the misinformation problem goes deeper than what information people are getting. In the United States especially, it has a lot to do with people's basic trust in institutions, which is low and very polarized. So one of our problems with misinformation here, and with the use of journalists, for example, to combat it, is that we're really divided about the role of journalists in our society. So journalists are critically important, as Natalia just said, for providing a common basis of fact for the society to discuss and kind of be based on. But the problem that we have right now is that trust in journalists is low, and it's especially low among Republicans, which really makes it difficult to have that kind of common conversation. So to answer your question, I think we even need to take a step back, even from this very urgent issue, and also address the problem of division that we have. So I think maybe the first thing that we need our policymakers and also media actors to do is to build some bridges over those divides. That doesn't mean giving up your principles necessarily, but I think it does mean reaching out to some extent and recognizing that there are others in society who may not feel the way that you do on hot button issues, but also finding ways to demonstrate that there's common ground between different groups. Because if we can't mend some of these divisions, these deep empirical epistemological divisions, then we're not going to be able to have the kind of conversations that you're talking about. So this raises the question of how can you do something like that? But I think that goes back maybe to the question of art and identity a little bit. I think that it's important for these groups to look for the common ground that people share. One thing that we have, this week in the United States is Thanksgiving, which thankfully is a holiday that it's strongly identified as a sort of national holiday in this country. And there's widespread general agreement that it's a good thing. We don't have a lot of those left. And that points to, I've got people that I'm working with are thinking about how food and culture can demonstrate similarity between others. So people in the U.S. will be eating pumpkin pie all across the country. That's a food that came from North America originally. It was domesticated 1,000 years ago by native people here, and now it's handed down to us. I think there's some potential to use those kinds of cultural, artistic, identity things to demonstrate links that are really important right now. So I'm sorry not to answer your question more directly about how can we more quickly address these issues, but I do want to express that, especially in our divided country, we're running up against the problem that we can we can correct misinformation when it pops up here or there on Facebook or another platform. But the studies of that demonstrate that while it works, the effects are really small, and it's not clear that they last very long. And that is largely because the divides are much deeper, and people's general trust in information is not strong.
And thank you for bringing us back to that initial issue of trust, because that is something that I want to ask not only all of you, our guests, also the audience. So first of all, I have a question for everyone in the chat. How do you think we can tackle mis and disinformation? And can you give us some solutions that you have found from your own experience? That's a question for everyone. Also in the chat, please let us know. We want to hear your thoughts. And now I want to ask you, well, first of all, Chris, I want to follow up with you, because you mentioned there is an erosion of trust in our leaders, our public institutions. There is an erosion of trust in journalists and media. So who do we trust? Just could you give me a few pointers there? And then we'll follow with Estêvão and Natalia. Who do we trust when it comes to climate narratives?
So this is a very good question. Usually we're looking at who do we not trust. So this turns it on its head. I mean, that's a question that needs more research, but one answer is that we're very divided. And you do have a core, maybe a plurality of Americans who are still generally trusting of the big institutions, the scientific institutions, the academic institutions, but that trust has gotten really fragmented. There are now sizable portions of the country that have very low or no trust in those institutions. And so the answer is different people trust different groups, and that's part of the epistemological crisis that we have now. We are seeing a rise in people turning to some of the influencers online. In the United States, Joe Rogan is a big one. And it's not, so I don't know if it's correct to say that people trust Joe Rogan on issues like medicine or on issues like climate, but they're influenced by him. The classic line in the United States is, "I'm just asking questions," which sounds like an interesting thing to do, but it introduces this kind of epistemic uncertainty where nobody really knows what's happening anymore, and they lose the ability to believe in anything, which is quite destructive to the possibility of positive action that we've been talking about.
What about you, Estêvão? Who do you think is trusted, or who do we trust when it comes to climate narratives?
Wow, this is the 1 million question.
Where have you seen some kind of hope? You mentioned religion. Is that where you think your work should be focusing on? Is that where you see a pathway connecting with spiritual leaders?
No. Actually, what I really can say is that I have friends that are kind of deniers, and I am very patient with them to talk about it. So I said, look, this is a little bit more complex, because sometimes they are not exactly deniers, but people don't have the whole information of what's going on, or through social media they receive a phrase that resumes the situation that seems to be reasonable. But when you look on the wide portrait of the situation, it's not like that. So usually I love to talk to people. I think that we have to have this ability of hearing people and talking to people and explain what's going on, unless they don't want. I mean, there is a quote of a writer here. I think it's Portuguese or Brazilian. I said, look, I don't get into polemic discussions, because when you get in the polemic, the other part will not receive what they will not change their mind. So with these people, I usually don't talk too much. But when people are open to conversation and are just not misleading something, I usually have, oh, let's talk about it. We need to have time to talk to the people, and this is also something that can change people's life, to have time to do things. It's another thing that I'm thinking a lot about. It is not to hurry, to have time to dedicate to other people. This can make the change.
What about you, Natalia? Who do you think we can trust?
Right now there is many people doing a great work in the climate agenda. A lot of young, elder, like there is a lot of people that we can watch and learn from. But I think I get all my hope from my community, like talking with people, going to the ground. As a journalist, I'm also a storyteller that learning how to work with data. But people barely remember about the numbers. It's to give me like authenticity or give me a chancela, but they remember the stories that make feel something, and this feeling is what drives change. So if you look at the stories, you have a good beginning to believe and to get trust.
I also want to highlight a comment from Josh Graphics watching on Facebook, who has 3 very practical, insightful tips on tackling misinformation, or at least sharing their experience on how they do it. Seeking clarity, getting info from trusted or licensed sources, and approve before spreading the news. I think those are very useful tips. I think the first seek clarity to avoid authenticity might be a typo. I hope so, because we don't want to avoid authenticity, but we do want to seek clarity. So thank you, Josh. And I'd love to get more comments and more insights from the audience on who do you trust when it comes to climate narratives, who you listen to. Are you listening to journalists? Are you listening to podcasters? Do you engage in social media discussions when it comes to misinformation or disinformation? How do you react online? So thank you, everyone in the chat, for sharing a bit about your experience, and thanks to Natalia and Chris and Estêvão for sharing as well on who could be trusted or where we could find some kind of hope for authentic climate stories. And Natalia, as you mentioned, you're a content creator. You work on social media as well, and you tell stories from the communities. I want to ask you, since you are also a GLF social media ambassador, part of a youth volunteer program, how do you think we can support young people in taking part of the climate conversation and shaping the climate narrative?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this space that we work, it's a really valuable space, the Global Landscape Forum, this volunteer program. It's a place where people can talk with this global network and see that their voices are seen, the stories are seen. So this is a great initiative. So I would recommend it a lot. But also be audience, ask yourself who are you following, what stories are you listening. So try to expand your vision and see what people are doing around there with no prejudice because of the age or something. There is a Nigerian writer I really like, named Chimamanda, and she reminds us the danger of a single story. What she said is that single stories can create stereotypes, and the problem with the stereotypes is that they are not untrue, but they are incomplete. So incomplete narratives can shape our perception of people, communities, and I would add climate crisis too. So expand your perception and read what young people are writing and producing all over the world.
Cool. Thank you very much. And Natalia, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you another question straight away because we have one in the chat, but I will actually also open this up to everybody else in a second. Not sure the exact wording of the question, but it is about the role of AI and the positive role of AI potentially, because you mentioned it earlier, but could you maybe, in your mind, what role does or could AI have in climate narratives? And I guess that's specifically LLMs rather than kind of more niche niche AI tools.
What AI tools we can use?
Just what role AI currently plays or could play in climate narratives, positive or negative?
Okay. I work with artificial intelligence. It's a perfect assistant for us to organize content, to helping with some operational activities that you need, but you can't trust on the AI information. I saw many times like people having some doubts and go to ChatGPT to ask about that. And they tell us like, maybe you have to compare or make a research after that. So the trust that we were talking about can't be directed to our artificial intelligence service because they are from some corporation that has their own goals, and we don't need to be part of this specific vision of the world. So use it as a tool, but not for defining your worldwide vision.
Cheers. Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to kick that straight over to you as well.
Artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
hard to avoid as a topic, I think, in any of these conversations at the moment.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I think there's a lot of dangers. I think there's a lot of I think we are seeing, and we will see, more fragmentation due to artificial intelligence flooding information systems, as Natalia has already said. However, I would highlight one study that was an interesting one that a colleague at MIT did, which looked at conspiracy theories. And what they did was they trained an LLM, an artificial intelligent chatbot, to talk to people about misinformed beliefs that they had. And what they actually found was that if properly trained, the chatbot could have a bigger effect on better informing people than other kinds of interventions. And the key reasons seem to be that people who hold various kinds of conspiracy theories or mistaken beliefs often are not misinformed people. Often they're very well informed. They've got a lot of information. They may have gone wrong somewhere along the line, but they have a lot of information. And what the LLM was able to do that other interventions, like putting labels on social media posts and that kind of thing, the LLM could have an actual conversation with them and could address multiple parts of their concerns, which, as I said, often were layered and fairly deep. So that is a potentially hopeful way that artificial intelligence could be used. I think there's a lot of difficult questions about how it would be rolled out. How do you get people to engage with this kind of thing? But it does show that when properly supervised by humans, there's some potential for these tools as communication agents in interactivity.
That's really interesting to hear.
I can share a link to that.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, I was gonna ask exactly that. Great. Estêvão, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. We've only got a few minutes, but if you do, it would be great to hear your thoughts as well.
No, I don't use too much into artificial intelligence. Also because I still prefer Google. that I kind of do the what exactly. I mean, for research, for organizing is really very helpful. But for research, people are doing a lot of research with ChatGPT, and I think that I prefer to what we did some years ago, to watch it and see, okay, this is trustful, though this I can trust in this. Okay, this is it's an interesting source, and I think that we should maintain this kind of critics over the content that we get from the web. So we can't stop it, but I think that the main problem of our world today is to have too much things easy for us to have in our lives. We should not get so much easy in life. I mean, it would be better for everybody to be more present or to have more presence on our lives. I think a lot about this, and I like to be like this. And I think that intelligence tries to deliver us a more easy way of living, and I don't think that is the best way.
Thank you very much. Cheers. I don't think I've ever been more aware of my own aging that Google is now considered old school either. Something to reflect on. We're coming to the end of our talk landscape. Before we do head off, it would be great to just hear a final word, any final thoughts that any of you would like to share, anything that we haven't touched on and you think would be important to mention. And it's just going to say 30 seconds each. Natalia, let's start with you as we were already rolling in that order.
Okay, I would just add to Estêvão that even Google are pushing us to the artificial intelligence solution. If you go to Google something, the first thing will be there. So if people are not educated about that, they will just trust the first thing that we will see. So it's hard to in Google. And what I would like to say in this part is like, we're living in this time when misinformation travels faster than truth. So when AI is reshaping the way we see the world, but the power of the stories still belongs to people. Each of us carries a narrative that can inspire action, protect our landscapes, and shift our future. So if you don't tell those stories, our stories, someone else will do it, or worse, some algorithm. So let's tell our stories, and use our voice, our platforms, our communities to build the future we want to.
Thank you very much. Chris?
So that was so eloquent. I'll say something similar, maybe slightly different words, but I think we're running up against the limits of this perspective that if we feed people facts, we will win them over. And I think Natalia really, and Estêvão earlier, has really pointed to the reality that we need to create communities and modes of action that are attractive in themselves. So the endpoint needs to be attractive. We need to do less hitting people over the head with facts and more creating environments, communities, movements that are attractive for people to participate in, and then the facts will fall into place.
That's fantastic. Thank you. It's really interesting that you mentioned community there, because I know that Natalia and Estêvão, you both mentioned that one of the most important ways for you of breaking down false climate narratives was one-on-one conversations with the people actually around you. Estêvão, final word from you.
I would say on this community idea, because also to face the challenges that we have in our everyday life, we need a community. We will need that. That's the best way to live our time. So to build your community, and as Natalia said, tell your stories, even if it's for a few people, or you have to have your people that you can live with and stay together, and hugs and stay together. I think this is the most important things of our times. And we are a lot of people here. I see it from Madagascar, from Nepal, from Somalia, from everywhere. So we are not alone.
Oh yeah, no, definitely not alone. Thanks everyone. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thanks to everyone in the audience watching on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. I think we can start to wrap up this conversation today. So thank you again, Estêvão. Thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Chris, for joining this Talk Landscape episode. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. And yeah, see you next time. I do want to announce, I have a couple of announcements later on, but yeah, thank you to our dear guests for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrea. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Chris, Natalia, Ed, and Andrea.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I do want to stay on for 1 minute because everyone mentioned in their final messages the importance of creating community and empathy. So I want to sign off with a quick announcement for people to join the Social Media Ambassadors Young Volunteer Program. Sorry, let me send you off camera, Eden, so you're not... There we go. I want to invite everyone to apply to become a 2026 GLF Social Media Ambassador. This is a unique online volunteer program for young content creators. So if you're between the ages of 18 and 35 years old, love to create content online, and are engaged and motivated for climate justice, sustainability, I definitely invite you to check out this program. And with that, that would be all for today's Talk Landscape episode. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.